Get good at something that lets you effectively contribute to big and neglected global problems. What ultimately makes for an impactful career? You can have more positive impact over the course of your career by aiming to help solve a more pressing problem. Many global issues should get more attention, but as individuals we should look for the biggest gaps in existing efforts. To do that, you can compare issues in terms of scale, neglectedness, and tractability. It turns out that some issues receive hundreds of times less attention relative to how big and solvable they seem. This means which issue you choose to work on is likely the biggest driver of your impact. In particular, our generation may see the rise of transformative technologies, which could lead to existential risks and make now a crucial moment that could affect the future for many generations to come. But our current institutions are doing little to address these issues. We have a list of global issues we think are particularly pressing for more people to work on right now. Find a path that gives you a bigger opportunity to contribute to those problems. Some paths give you more leverage than others, in that they enable you to mobilize more resources, money, attention, skill, towards the most pressing problems. You can get more leverage by e.g. working in government and policy, mobilizing others or spreading ideas, e.g. media, helping people or organizations that have a lot of leverage, making well-targeted donations, or helping to develop certain research and technology. Moreover, some solutions make 10 or 100 times as much progress on pressing problems per year of work, so aiming to support more effective solutions is another way to greatly increase your contribution. We advocate taking a hits-based approach to doing this, which involves using rules of thumb to find solutions that have an above-average chance of being among the most effective. See our list of ideas for career paths in which you can make an especially big contribution. Find work that fits you better. The most productive people in a field often have far more output than the average. Plus, excelling in almost any field gives you more connections, resources, and reputation, which give you more leverage. So, once you have identified some promising options, choose between them based on your expected fit with them.
Career strategy. Your most impactful career is the one that's best on the product of these three factors over its course, and it's often possible to find a path that's 10 times better on one or more of these dimensions that's just as personally satisfying. But how do you actually find the best possible path? Think like a scientist. Make some best guesses at the most promising long-term paths, identify key uncertainties, do low-cost tests to resolve them, make a best guess, then update your guesses every 1 to 3 years. Over time, especially focus on the following 3 overlapping stages. Explore. Learn about and test out promising longer-term paths, until you feel ready to bet on one for at least a few years. It's hard to predict where you'll have the best fit, but some paths are much higher impact than others, so it's worth exploring to make sure you don't miss a great one. This is typically the key focus for people ages 18 to 24. Invest. Take a bet on a longer-term path by building the career capital that will most accelerate you in it. Most people only reach their peak productivity between the ages of 40 to 60, so we also encourage people to invest in their skills, connections, reputation, and so on to have more leverage in the future. While doing this, it's normally better to aim a little too high than too low, but make sure you have a backup plan, so you can try another path if it doesn't work out. Ages 25 to 35. Deploy. Use the career capital you've built to support the most effective solutions to the most pressing problems at the time. Age 36 onwards. While doing all this, seek community. Finding a great community gives you hundreds of connections at once, and 2 people working together can have more than twice the impact of 1 person alone. We help to build the effective altruism community to help you, and ourselves, find like-minded people. Focusing your career on tackling the world's most pressing problems is not for everyone and is certainly not easy. If you're not able to change jobs right now, you can still have a lot of impact by enabling others or donating to work on the problems you think are most pressing, while also investing in your career capital. If you do change careers, look for work you enjoy and that meets your other needs. If a path feels like a constant struggle, it's probably not sustainable or inspiring to others, and so probably not ideal even for your impact.
Fortunately, we think the steps we recommend, building career capital, exploring, and contributing to meaningful problems, align with what's personally rewarding for a lot of people. And so, while there may be some trade-offs, we think these steps are a route to a career that's satisfying and fulfilling, as well as one that addresses some of the biggest issues of our time. Next, you can read the full Key Ideas series to learn more about each step. Alternatively, dive straight into our lists of ideas for pressing problems and impactful career paths, or if you prefer audio, check out our podcast. After that, if you're interested in working on one of our priority areas, request to speak to our team to get one-on-one support. What is social impact? A definition. Decorative post preview. We think making a difference is best understood as the number of people whose lives you improve, and how much you improve them, regardless of who they are or where or when they're living. In this article, we try to summarize 2,400 years of philosophical thought to explain why. Lots of people say they want to make a difference, do good, have a social impact, or make the world a better place, but they rarely say what they mean by those terms. By clarifying your definition, you can better target your efforts and make a difference more effectively. But how should you define social impact? Thousands of years of philosophy have gone into that question. We're going to try to sum up that thinking, introduce a practical, rough and ready definition of social impact, and explain why we think it's a good definition to focus on. This is a bit ambitious for one article, so to the philosophers in the audience, please forgive the enormous simplifications. We hope the usefulness of the definition will make up for it. A simple definition of social impact. If you just want a quick answer, here's the simple version of our definition. A more philosophically precise one, and an argument for it, follows below. Your social impact is given by the number of people whose lives you improve and how much you improve them, over the long term. This shows that you can increase your impact in two ways, by helping more people over time, or by helping the same number of people to a greater extent.
We say, over the long term, because you can help more people either by helping a greater number now, or taking actions with better long-term effects. This definition is enough to help you figure out what to aim at in many situations, e.g., by roughly comparing the number of people affected by different issues. But sometimes you need a more precise definition. A more rigorous definition of social impact. Here's our working definition of social impact. Social impact, or making a difference, is, tentatively, about promoting total expected well-being, considered impartially, over the long term, without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance. In the rest of this article, we'll expand on why we think social impact is primarily about promoting what's of value, i.e., making the world better, rather than other kinds of moral considerations. Why we think making the world a better place is in large part about promoting total expected well-being. What we mean by without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance. How we can assess what makes a difference in the face of uncertainty. We believe that taking this definition seriously has some potentially radical implications about where people who want to do good should focus, which we also explore. If you're interested in the philosophy behind these ideas and their implications, read on. Otherwise, you can skip to the next article in our Key Ideas series. 2 final notes before we start. First, our definition is tentative. There's a good chance we're wrong and it might change. Second, its purpose is practical. It aims to cover the most important aspects of doing good to help people make better real-life decisions, rather than capture everything that's morally relevant. Reading time, 15 minutes. In a nutshell, the definition, social impact, or making a difference, is, tentatively, about promoting total expected well-being, considered impartially, over the long term, without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance. Why promoting? When people say they want to make a difference, we think they're primarily talking about making the world better, i.e., promoting good things and preventing bad ones, rather than merely not doing unethical actions, e.g., stealing, or being virtuous in some other way. Why well-being? We understand well-being as an inclusive notion, meaning anything that makes people better off. We take this to encompass at least promoting happiness, health, and the ability for people to live the life they want. We chose this as the focus because most people agree these things matter,
but there are often large differences in how much different actions improve these outcomes. Why do we say expected well-being? We can never know with certainty the effects that our actions will have on well-being. The best we can do is try to weigh the benefits of different actions by their probability, i.e., compare based on expected value. Note that while the action with the highest expected value is best in principle, that doesn't imply that the best way to find the best action is to make explicit quantitative estimates. It's often better in practice to use rules of thumb, our intuition, or other methods, since these maximize expected value better than explicit expected value calculations. Read more on expected value. Why? Considered impartially. We mean that we strive to treat equal effects on different beings' welfare as equally morally important, no matter who they are, including people who live far away or in the future. In addition, we think that the interests of many non-human animals, and even potentially sentient future digital beings, should be given significant weight, although we're unsure of the exact amount. Thus, we don't think social impact is limited to promoting the welfare of any particular group we happen to be partial to, such as people who are alive today, or human beings as a species. Why do we say, over the long term? We think that if you take an impartial perspective, then the welfare of those who live in the future matters. Because there could be many more future generations than those alive today, our effects on them could be of great moral importance. We thus try to always consider not just the direct and short-term effects of actions, but also any indirect effects that might occur in the far future.
Why do we add, without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance? We aren't sure that improving welfare is the only thing that matters morally. Moral philosophers have been arguing over what matters for a long time, and it seems arrogant to assume we know the answer. Thus, we think it's important to respect other values as well, e.g., autonomy and fairness. We find that this rarely comes up. Respecting people's autonomy and promoting their welfare generally go hand in hand, but if there were a conflict, we would try very hard to avoid any actions that seem seriously wrong from one of these other common sense perspectives. Social impact is about making the world better. What does it mean to act ethically? Moral philosophers have debated this question for millennia, and have arrived at three main kinds of answers. Making the world better, e.g., helping others. Acting rightly, e.g., respecting the rights of others and not doing wrong. Being virtuous, e.g., being honest, kind, and wise. These correspond to consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics, respectively. We think all three perspectives have something to offer, but when our readers talk about wanting to make a difference, they're most interested in the first of these perspectives, changing the world for the better. We agree this focus makes sense. We don't just want to avoid doing wrong, or live honest lives, but actually leave the world better than we found it. And there's a lot we can all do to get better at that. For instance, we've shown that by donating 10% of their income to highly effective charities, most college graduates can save the lives of over 40 people over their lifetimes with a relatively minor sacrifice. From an ethical perspective, whether you save 40 lives or not will probably be one of the most significant questions you'll ever face. In our essay on your most important decision, we argued that some career paths open to you will do hundreds of times more to make the world a better place than others. So it seems really important to figure out what those paths are. In contrast, it's often a lot easier to know whether a path violates someone's rights or involves virtuous behavior. Most career paths seem pretty okay on those fronts, so there's less to gain from focusing there.
In fact, even people who emphasize moral rules and virtue agree that if you can make others better off, that's a good thing to do, and that it's even better to make more people better off than fewer. And in general, we think deontologists and utilitarians agree a lot more than people think. John Rawls was one of the most influential, non-consequentialist philosophers of the 20th century, and said, too, all ethical doctrines worth our attention take consequences into account in judging rightness. One which did not would simply be irrational, crazy. Since there seem to be big opportunities to make people better off, and some seem to be better than others, we should focus on finding those. So, while we think it's really important to avoid harming others and to strive to act virtuously, when it comes to real decisions, we think the potential positive consequences are what we should focus on the most. This might sound like common sense, but it turns out to be an unusual way to look at things. Much existing advice on ethical careers is about avoiding working at bad companies rather than how we can do more good. And discussion of ethical living more broadly typically focuses on reducing harm rather than how we can best do good. For instance, when it comes to fighting climate change, there's a lot of focus on our personal carbon emissions, rather than figuring out what we can do to best fight climate change. Asking the second question suggests radically different actions. The best things we can do to fight climate change probably involve working on, advocating for, and donating to exceptional research and advocacy opportunities, rather than worrying about plastic bags, recycling, or turning out the lights. Why is there so much focus on our personal emissions? One explanation is that common sense ethical thinking hasn't caught up with the situation that modern technology has put us in. Our ethical views originate from before the 20th century, and sometimes from thousands of years ago. If you were a medieval peasant, your main ethical priority was to help your family survive, without cheating or harming your neighbors. You didn't have the knowledge, power, or time to help hundreds of people or affect the long-term future.
The Industrial Revolution gave us wealth and technology not even available to kings and queens in previous centuries. Now, many ordinary citizens of rich countries have enormous power to do good, and this means the potential consequences of our actions are usually what's most ethically significant about them. So, we think, social impact, or making a difference, should be about making the world better. But what does that mean? What does it mean to make the world better? We imagine building a world in which the most beings can have the best possible lives in the long term. Lives that are free from suffering and injustice, and full of happiness, adventure, connection, and meaning. There are two key components to this vision: impartiality and a focus on well-being, which we'll now unpack. Impartiality. Everyone matters equally. When it comes to making a difference, we think we should strive to be impartial, i.e., to give equal weight to everyone's interests. This means striving to avoid privileging the interests of anyone based on arbitrary factors such as their race, gender, or nationality, as well as where or even when they live. We also think that the interests of many non-human animals should be given significant weight, although we're unsure of the exact amount. Importantly, we're also concerned about potentially sentient future digital beings, which could exist in very large numbers and whose welfare could be in part determined by how we design them. The idea of impartiality is common in many ethical traditions, and is closely related to the golden rule of treating others as you'd like to be treated, no matter who they are. Acting impartially is an ideal, and it's not all that matters. As individuals, we all have other personal goals, such as caring for our friends and family, carrying out our personal projects, and having our own lives go well. Even considering only moral goals, it's plausible we have other values or ethical commitments beyond impartially helping others. We're not saying you should abandon these other goals, and strive to treat everyone equally in all circumstances. Rather, the claim is that insofar as your goal is to make a difference, or have a social impact, we don't see good reason to privilege any one group over another, and that you should therefore have some concern for the interests of strangers, non-humans, and other neglected groups.
And even if you think that the ultimate ideal is to have equal concern for all beings, as a matter of psychology, you probably have other, competing goals. And it's not helpful to pretend you don't. In Peter Singer's essay, Famine, Affluence, and Morality, he imagines you're walking and come across a child drowning in a pond. Everyone agrees that you should run in and save the child, even if it would ruin your new suit and shoes. This illustrates a principle that many people can get behind. If you can help a stranger a great deal with little cost to yourself, that's a good thing to do. This shows that most people give some weight to the interests of others. If it also turns out that you have a lot of power to help others, as we argued above, then it would imply that social impact should be one of the main focuses of your life. Impartiality also implies that you should think carefully about who you can help the most. It's common to say that charity begins at home, but if everyone's interests matter equally, and you can help more people who are living far away, e.g., because they're without cheap basic necessities you can provide, then you should help the more distant people. We're convinced that a degree of impartiality is reasonable, and that many people should try thinking harder about impartiality than they are used to. But there remains huge questions about how impartial to be. The trend over history seems to have been towards a greater impartiality and a wider and wider circle of concern, but we're unsure where that should stop. For instance, compared to people today, how exactly should we weigh the interests of non-human animals, people who don't exist yet, and potential digital agents? This is called the question of moral patienthood. Here's an example of the stakes of this question. We don't see much reason to discount the interests of future generations simply because they're distant from us in time. But because there could be so many people in the future, the main focus of efforts to do good should be to leave the best possible world for those future generations. This idea has been called long-termism, and is explored in a separate article in the Key Ideas series. We think long-termism is an important perspective, which is why we say, over the long term, in our definition of social impact. This section was about who to help. The next section is about what helps.
Well-being. What does it mean to help others? When aiming to help others, our tentative hypothesis is that we should aim to increase their well-being as much as possible, i.e., enable more individuals to live flourishing lives that are healthy, happy, fulfilled, are in line with their wishes, and are free from avoidable suffering. Although people disagree over whether well-being is the only thing that matters morally, almost everyone agrees that things like health and happiness matter a lot, and so we think it should be a central focus in efforts to make a difference. Putting impartiality and a focus on well-being together means that, roughly, how much positive difference an action makes depends on how it increases the well-being of those affected, and how many are helped, no matter when or where they live. What well-being consists of more precisely is a controversial question, which you can read about in this introduction by Finn Morehouse. In brief, there are three main views. The hedonic view. Well-being consists in your degree of positive versus negative mental states such as happiness, meaning, discovery, excitement, connection, and equanimity. The preference satisfaction view. Well-being consists in your desires being fulfilled. Objective list theories. Well-being consists in achieving certain goods, like friendship, knowledge, and health. In philosophical thought experiments, these different views have very different implications. For instance, if you support the hedonic view, you'd need to accept that being secretly placed into a virtual reality machine that generates amazing experiences is better for you than staying in the real world. If instead you support, or just have some degree of belief in, the preference satisfaction view, you don't have to accept this implication, because your desires can include not being deceived and achieving things in the real world. In practical situations, however, we rarely find that different views of well-being drive different decisions, such as about which global problems to focus on. The three notions correlate closely enough that differences in views are usually driven by other factors, such as the question of where to draw the boundaries of the expanding circle discussed in the previous section. What else might matter besides well-being? There are many candidates, which is why we say promoting well-being is only a tentative hypothesis.
Preserving the environment enables the planet to support more beings with greater well-being in the long term, and so is also good from the perspective of promoting well-being. However, some believe that we should preserve the environment even if it doesn't make life better for any sentient beings, showing they place intrinsic value on preserving the environment. Others think we should place intrinsic value on autonomy, fairness, knowledge, and many other values. Fortunately, promoting these other values often goes hand in hand with promoting well-being, and there are often common goals that people with many values can share, such as avoiding existential risks. So again, we believe that the weight people put on these different values has less effect on what to do than often supposed, although they can lead to differences in emphasis. We're not going to be able to settle the question of defining everything that's of moral value in this article, but we think that promoting well-being is a good starting point. It captures much of what matters and is a goal that almost everyone can get behind. How good is it to create a happy person? We've mostly spoken above as if we're dealing with potential effects on a fixed population, but some decisions could result in more people existing in the long term, e.g., deflecting an asteroid, while others mainly benefit people who already exist, e.g., treating people with parasitic worms, which rarely kill people but cause a lot of suffering. So we need to compare the value of increasing the number of people with positive well-being with benefiting those who already exist. This question is studied by the field of population ethics and is an especially new and unsettled area of philosophy. We won't try to summarize this huge topic here, but our take is that the most plausible view is that we should maximize total well-being, i.e., the number of people, again including all beings whose lives matter morally, who exist in all of history, weighted by their level of well-being. This is why we say total well-being in the definition. That said, there are some powerful responses to this position, which we briefly sketch out in the article on long-termism. For this reason, we're not certain of this totalist view, and so put some weight on other perspectives.
Expected value, acting under uncertainty. How do you know what will increase well-being the most? In short, you don't. You have to weigh up the different likelihoods of different outcomes, and act even though you're uncertain. We believe the theoretical ideal here is to take the action with the greatest expected value compared to the counterfactual. This means taking into account both how much well-being our actions could result in, and how likely those outcomes are, and adding them together. In practice, we try to approximate this with rules of thumb, like the importance, neglectedness, tractability framework. Going into expected value theory would take us too far afield, so if you want to learn more, check out our separate articles. Expected value, how to act when you're uncertain what will help. Counterfactuals and how they change our view of what does good. How much risk to take if you want to do good. Cluelessness, can we know the effects of our actions? Why do we say, without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance? In our definition, we say social impact is about promoting well-being, but we also add, without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance. The purpose of this clause is to remind us of how much could be left out of our definition, and how radical our uncertainty is. Many moral views that were widely held in the past are regarded as flawed or even abhorrent today. This suggests we should expect our own moral views to be flawed in ways that are difficult for us to recognize. There is still significant moral disagreement within society, among contemporary moral philosophers, and, indeed, within our own team. And past projects aiming to pursue an abstract ethical ideal to the exclusion of all else have often ended badly. The "without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance" clause is a shorthand for the idea that we should
respect others' rights, respect others' values and be willing to compromise with them, consider a range of ethical perspectives, and take actions that seem good based on many perspectives. Respect our other important personal priorities, like family, personal projects, and our own well-being. Be very cautious about doing anything that seems obviously wrong according to common sense. We think everyone has reason to be morally uncertain, and so support these principles. You can read more about this in our separate articles. Is it ever okay to take a harmful job in order to do more good? Moral uncertainty. How to act when you're uncertain about what's good. Coordination. Why to respect other people's values, even if you think they're wrong. Ways people trying to do good accidentally make things worse, and how to avoid them. Considering these principles, if we had to sum up our ethical code into a single sentence, it might be something like, promote well-being while respecting others' rights. And we think this is a position that people with consequentialist, deontological and virtue-based ethics should all be able to get behind. It's just that they support it for different reasons. Is this just utilitarianism? No. Utilitarianism claims that you're morally obligated to take the action that does the most to increase well-being, as understood according to the hedonic view. Our definition shares an emphasis on well-being and impartiality, but we depart from utilitarianism in that we don't make strong claims about what's morally obligated. Mainly, we believe that helping more people is better than helping fewer. If we were to make a claim about what we ought to do, it would be that we should help others when we can benefit them a lot with little cost to ourselves, which is much weaker than utilitarianism.
Our view is compatible with also putting weight on other notions of well-being, other moral values, e.g., autonomy, and other moral principles. In particular, we don't endorse harming others for the greater good. We're very uncertain about the correct moral theory and try to put weight on multiple perspectives. Read more about how effective altruism is different from utilitarianism. Overall, many members of our team don't identify as being straightforward utilitarians or consequentialists.
Our main position isn't that people should be more utilitarian, but that they should pay more attention to consequences than they do, and especially to the large differences in the scale of the consequences of different actions. If one career path might save hundreds of lives, and another won't, we should all be able to agree that matters. In short, we think ethics should be more sensitive to scope. Conclusion. We're not sure what it means to make a difference, but we think our definition is a reasonable starting point that many people should be able to get behind. Social impact, or making a difference, is, tentatively, about promoting expected well-being, considered impartially, over the long term, without sacrificing anything that might be of comparable moral importance. We've also gestured at how social impact might fit with your personal priorities and what else matters ethically, as well as many of our uncertainties about the definition, which can have a big effect on where to focus. We think one of the biggest questions is whether to accept long-termism, so we've dedicated the next article to that question. From there, you can start to explore which global problems are most pressing based on whatever definition of social impact you think is correct. You'll most likely find that the question of which global problems to focus on is more driven by empirical or methodological uncertainties than moral ones. But if you find a moral question is crucial, you can come back and explore the further reading below. In short, if you have the extraordinary privilege to be a college graduate in a rich country and to have options for how to spend your career, it's plausible that social impact, as defined in this way, should be one of your main priorities. How to act on that priority effectively is the focus of the rest of the Key Ideas series.